Once again, and yes, back in New York where my connection actually works and I can initiate the live stream. We'll be we'll be speaking of the Supreme Court decisions on abortion pills and bump stocks shortly. Of course, this is Nuance, and I'm Mike Scala, joined as always by Jay Carter, also known as Timid, the hip hop artist in the chair of BLM Tokyo, back from Tokyo. What's going on, Jay?
Hey, what's up? Yes, back from Tokyo. It was a good trip. I was up there for a couple of days for the Juneteenth Gala put on by the Legacy Foundation. It's an organization, a nonprofit organization, black-owned group in Tokyo. They also own Soul Food House, a restaurant there, and they do a lot of community work. I've worked with them on several occasions. I've given talks at the foundation. Um, and helped with donations and such. And it was a good event. So a lot of cultural sharing. A lot of people came out. It was even though it was a Juneteenth celebration, it wasn't like it was restricted for black people only. So there was a lot of people that came out. There was even a Japanese gospel choir that came out and sang and performed, and so it was a good night. I'm glad I went up there.
Nice. I saw a post on your social media. It looked like a good time.
Yeah, it was good. Good food, some music, performances, made some connections. So that's always good.
Well, now I'm jealous because the food in Antigua was not as good as I was. I actually had some really good penne at the Italian restaurant one night, and then tried some of the other stuff at the resort. Wasn't really thrilled, so I was like, let me go back, and at least I'll be good with that penne. It was a spicy penne, and I ordered it the second time, and the second time it wasn't spicy at all, to the point where I thought they gave me the wrong dish. I'm like, nah, this isn't what I ordered the first time. But it was. It was just very, very watered down. I found that the food to be pretty inconsistent on the whole there.
I wonder if it was a different chef in the kitchen during that time.
I wouldn't doubt
The
that.
guy that knew how to cook was off, and then like the backup was there.
Right. But it was funny because it has an Italian name. I think it's something like penne alla arrabbiato or something like that, but it's an
Okay.
Italian thing. But it was an Italian restaurant in this resort. And so when I was ordering it, here's a tie-in to BLM Tokyo. The waitress said, "Do you want the penne arrabbiato?" And I said, "No," but I thought maybe it was a different dish. I was like, "No, this one, alla arrabbiato." She goes, "Yeah, the Italian one." And then I'm thinking, this is an Italian restaurant. Everything here is supposed to be Italian.
Right.
I'm like, all
Right.
right. But
Isn't that Ariat, doesn't that indicate it's kind of spicy or there's a spice to it? Isn't that
yeah,
word associated with it?
I'm not sure the direct translation of it, but that dish is supposed to be a spicy pasta dish. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, it just wasn't, it just was so watered down the second time. I gotta say, the steak I had was pretty good at the steakhouse, but then I went for the short ribs and I didn't really care for those. And so I don't know. I was told that on all inclusive resorts, a lot of the food isn't great all the time. When I was in Cancun last year, I thought it was good. So I guess it's hit or miss at these places.
Well, I think in those places they make those things in bulk, kind of buffet focus type of thing, because if it's all inclusive and then it's like all you can eat, you know what I mean? Making it to order would probably be really hectic in the kitchen if it's full.
I don't think so. Well, yeah, that's the thing. The resort wasn't very full. There were probably under 100 people in the whole place, and it could
Well,
hold
that's pretty
a
good.
lot more than that. They had, I think, seven restaurants, but because it was so under capacity, you'd only have a few open per night, and then they would use the same wait staff at each of the restaurants. And I don't think they were just bulk making food because when you ordered the dish, it would take a very long time to come. Sometimes it was like an hour
Oh, okay.
to come out.
Okay.
That they did have a buffet, and that was pretty cool. Very simple, right? Breakfast type foods we had there. Eggs, toast, some fruit cut up. You can't really go wrong with that. So that was pretty
Right.
nice, right? But restaurants were disappointed. And we had an incident. I actually complained. I'm not one to complain. I even said this.
Uh-oh.
I don't complain when I stay places if I can avoid it because I know it's tough out there. People are just doing what they can. The staff, for the most part, was really great and attentive, but we had an issue with the room and a very dangerous one too. And this is really no laughing matter. Uh, the shower was very leaky in the room to the point where you had to put towels down because there would just be water everywhere, right? It would make puddles of
Uh,
water on the floor if you didn't do that. It was coming out of everywhere. You couldn't even figure it out. it was mostly when you shut the shower off, all of a sudden water would be dripping from everywhere, even the top, like like the metal rod that holds the shower together, it would be coming out of there, it's coming out of every place. Um, then we started seeing water build up in the ceiling and dripping out through the light fixture.
Oh,
Yeah. And when my girlfriend was taking a shower, we had a blackout in the room, most likely due to this, due to water
a short because
shorting out the power from dripping into the light.
that's
Now
a fire.
she could have been electrocuted. That's a very dangerous,
That's a
situation,
fire hazard too. The whole
right? And I'm sure it wasn't contained to just that room. Right? It could have been an issue for everyone at the hotel. So obviously we called down. They changed rooms. The new room we got wasn't as good, and they weren't very attentive. Right? No follow up call. Hey, we're sorry about that. How are you doing? How's the new room? In fact, it was kind of a downgrade. Right? The second room didn't have a coffee machine. The fridge wasn't stocked. It was kind of dirty. It seemed like they just kind of like dumped us in this new room without even really taking care. Right? Without cleaning it, preparing it. An upgrade would have been nice. Something to make us feel like you guys are sorry you almost killed us, but we didn't get
yeah.
that. So
And it sounds like if it was only 100 people there, like they had obviously had empty
ample,
rooms that they could have put you in.
ample space.
An
Yeah,
upgrade would have been the call of the day.
I think so. And not that we were expecting it, but don't downgrade us and make us feel like we're an inconvenience to you. You know what I mean? It was kind of like rolling our eyes. Oh, we're gonna have to move you. It's like, come on, man, you almost killed us.
Right.
So
Wow.
I did let them know about that. Hopefully, they do better, right? Because this is a dangerous condition, and they really should be
Right.
checking the plumbing there and in all the rooms, not just that one. I mean, make sure that water isn't dripping out of the shower into the lights.
Right. That's yeah. Wow.
You
I'm
know,
glad you guys made it out of there okay.
yeah, yeah. And I gotta say, the Caribbean Sea, beautiful, right? As
Mm.
always, it was kind of nice that there weren't a lot of people at the resort because it was like having a private beach to yourself, right? Like
Yeah.
if you saw Entourage, you saw that episode where Vinny and Turtle were on the beach in Mexico, I think it was, and they kind of had their own beach to themselves, and they were just chilling there for a while with no one else around. It's kind of how it felt. You're in the Caribbean, beautiful weather, beautiful sand, beautiful water, you know, on a resort with really no one else in sight. That is nice, to have that privacy, have that little private luxury spot.
Right.
So that was cool, and there were definitely nice things about the trip. We took a boat ride around Antigua, which I think I mentioned last week. We were going to do that. That was really
Right.
cool. So
I've
I
never
really
seen Entourage, by the way.
okay, yeah. Well, I watch it still. I watch it on I watch the repeat sometimes. I think I mentioned this when I'm trying to go to sleep. Sometimes I can't have it on
Right.
right now. So it was good to get away. You know what I mean? But I do hope that the hotel gets their act together with certain things. Also,
Would you go back?
I would go back to Antigua for sure. I would
Would
not
you go
pay
back to
money.
the
I would not pay money to go back to this resort. No.
okay.
Now, I did mention that they named a drink after me. People were teasing me, oh, they name a drink after every guy that comes. Yeah, maybe. But I will say this, there really wasn't anyone at the resort. I sat down and talked to this bartender for like 2 hours. The resort was just opening. I'll mention that. So it's new, right? Growing pains.
Right.
Just opening, really wasn't anyone around. And the bartender was trying to get her act together, what kind of drinks are going to be my specialties. And she's working on a recipe book herself. And so new experience. I was one of the first customers there, and we spoke for a few hours. I was there with my girlfriend. We kind of sat at the bar speaking to this bartender for a while, and she did say that I should tell people to come to the place to order the Mike's Hard Dragon Fruit. She's like, instead of Mike's Hard Lemonade, we're going to call it Mike's Hard Dragon Fruit. And if you don't drink alcohol, you can order the Remus Soft Spritzer, the non-alcoholic version. But I was like, listen, I know you're kind of being funny, but I'm really going to tell people. I said, listen, when people come, like, you better know what that drink is. You know what I mean? She's like, no, she's like, for sure. She's like, tell people to come and order that. So,
Put it on the menu now.
yeah, yeah. We'll have to see it on the menu, and maybe we'll test her out, right? Because for the people saying that she's just saying that, like she'll plug in any guy. All right, go there and order a Joe's
Whoa.
Hard Dragon Fruit, or pick some other name, a Jay's Hard Dragon Fruit, and
Right.
see if she's like coming right up, or if she's like, nah, it's Mike's. You know what I mean?
Right, right, right,
Put it
right.
to a test.
Right. So next time you go to Antigua and you're staying at a different resort,
Right.
just drive by and go to the bar and then see if they have it on the menu.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
Yeah.
I'll tend to do a sting operation.
Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Pay some guy on the outside. Hey man, go
All
in
right,
there and
right.
order
Go in.
some
This is what I want
pleasure.
you to do. Go in there. He's like, what? Just do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, very nice. Like I said, most of the staff there was very nice. This bartender was very nice. She did say she was going to send me her recipe book, and so
Mm.
I'm, happy to review that. But if you're watching, I just want you to hold up your end of the bargain and call the drink Mike's Hard Dragon Fruit like you promised you
Nice.
would.
Nice. Very nice.
So yeah, good to be back in New York. I gotta say that. After being away for a week, I was getting kind of antsy. I wanted to be back into the swing of things here, and so
Mm.
I've been playing catch up the last few days, and I'm happy to get back into it.
That's what's up. Good.
Yeah. And by the way, one thing I'll mention, because I've been kind of giving an inside look at the process of getting this music together, I took what I would consider to be an unusual step. Maybe other people do this. I don't know. You can let me know, Jay, if you think this is common or if you've done this. But I sent the mixes to the mastering engineer before I went to Antigua, right? And I was like, all right,
Hmm.
we'll go to Antigua, celebrate being done with that, not think about it for a while. The masters came back. Now I told the mastering engineer to make sure the bass was bumping. I mean, you even mentioned like on one of the songs, we wanted more bass coming out, right? So
Hmm.
he did that, right? And it came back, bass was bumping. I played it in the car, and some of the vocals sounded now like they were a little under the bass because I had mixed it where it was balanced perfectly, but that was with the bass response I was getting out of the pre-master mixes, right? Once the
Hmm.
bass now is turned up, it sounds like on some of the songs that the vocals are being drowned out a little bit. So I went back in. I'm like, all right, instead of having him remaster, because I like the way the beats are bumping, I said, let me just adjust my mixes to work with your masters. And so I'm going back in, and for some of the songs, I'm just tweaking the vocals a little bit, knowing that once he masters them with that same formula, right, same settings that he used the first time, the vocals should be popping out a little bit more and more balanced with the bass. So I don't know if that's usually done because I always think of mastering as the final step in the process, right?
It usually
But when the
is.
masters came back, they just weren't sounding exactly like I had in my head. I'm like, ooh, I want the vocals to be a little bit more prominent here as compared to how hard the bass is hitting. So um, we're going through round two now. Again, not of having him remaster, but of adjusting the mixes to coincide with the master he did.
Right. And the thing is, he's supposed to I mean, he's supposed to make that balance. Um, not put the bass in that's overpowering, not bring it up that it overpowers the vocals or anything like that. The mix, the master process is supposed to help balance some of that out. Unless the mix is really bad. If it's balanced in the mix, then it should be pretty fine.
Right. But he also doesn't know how I hear it in my head.
Right, right, right,
I want it to sound a certain way. I'm sure anyone listening to it is going to think it sounds great now,
right,
but I still want it to hit a certain way.
right,
I balanced it out where, don't forget, I'm listening to these songs for like 9 months now, constantly.
right,
And so I've hit this level finally where the the vocals sat exactly where I wanted them to on the beat, but that had a lot to do with how bumping the beat was, right? Now that
right,
the beats are bumping a lot more, it's kind of pushing the vocals under a little bit. Again, someone else hearing that might be like, well, it's fine, that sounds good, but it's not how
right,
I envisioned it to be, right?
right, 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 right.
I'm trying to compensate for that.
True, true, true.
Yeah,
All right.
very close to the finish line here. I'm getting kind of anxious to get this done, because you keep
Hear you.
telling yourself it's gonna be done by this week. I gotta do this. It's gonna be done by next week. You know what I mean? But I don't want to keep putting it off. But I know in my head exactly how I want it to sound.
Yep, I hear that.
So,
All right.
well, we've got some topics to cover here.
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, we've got two Supreme Court cases that came out. A lot of people are talking about these cases as though they say something about the politics of the court. I see a lot of people
Hmm.
framing this through a political lens. not enough discussion really on the legal analysis itself. Now, I understand the cynicism. We've expressed that cynicism on Nuance before, where it often feels like the court will reach a conclusion first based on its
Right.
own partisan makeup and then back its way into a decision using constitutional analysis that may or may not be on solid ground. We talked
Right.
about that with the case overturning Roe v. Wade, right? It did seem
Hmm.
like the goal there was to overturn Roe v. Wade and then come up with a reason that kind of made sense. Because when you really delved into the reasoning, you could
Right.
pick holes in the logic, right? It didn't
And
really.
it's clearly been their agenda, at least the conservatives. It's been their agenda for decades.
Right. With that being said, I don't think we should be throwing all constitutional analysis out the window when we talk about these cases and always presume that everything they do is strictly based on politics. There are still
Mm.
constitutional principles to adhere to. And I think you have a perfect example of that here because that bump stock case, right, the gun case, was the Supreme Court overturning Trump policy. Now, some people are going, oh my God, does this mean that the Supreme Court is suddenly anti-Trump or that he's more conservative than them? Or no, I mean, I think this is just them doing their constitutional analysis and coming to that conclusion. It doesn't really say a whole lot about politics, I don't think. I think it says really more about their understanding of the Constitution. Now, you can look at that politically, if you wish, by saying, oh, well, the way they interpret the Constitution is originalist or, shows a conservative bend constitutionally or what have you,
Mhm.
right? That's fine. But at the end of the day, they are doing constitutional analysis. And I wouldn't read into it a whole lot more than that. I wouldn't say this signifies them turning on Trump or no longer being a conservative majority. No, they're coming to these decisions using constitutional principles. And by the way, consistent ones, whether we agree or disagree, they have been pretty consistent, at least the majority has, of the Supreme Court, on the way they interpret the Constitution in cases like this. We talked about in the past executive orders that the Biden administration made that the court overturned by saying that the presidential administration, the executive branch, exceeded its authority and that this was left to Congress, right? This decision was the same. Now, again, some are saying they're just so in love with guns and that's what, all right, maybe, but they aren't saying that you can never ban bump stocks, right? They're saying that it couldn't have been done this way through executive action. So to back up a bit, for those who don't know what we're talking about, right? There was a mass shooting in Las Vegas in 2017.
Hmm.
So this
At
was the
the
Trump.
concert. Yeah.
Yes, right. The Trump administration said they were going to ban bump stocks, right? And those are devices that you could attach to guns to turn non-machine guns into machine guns effectively, right? It makes
The
them.
Trump administration said that they were going to ban bump stocks.
Well, again, this was in 2017, right?
Oh
So
my gosh.
the Trump administration was in power. And in fact, there was a quote. We probably should read this quote because I know a lot of people say Democrats only want to take your guns away and all that kind of stuff. This was the president in 2017, right? We know who he was, saying, take the firearms first and then go to court because that's another system. Because a lot of times, by the time you go to court, it takes so long to go to court to get the due process procedures. I like taking the guns early. Like in this crazy man's case that just took place in Florida, he had a lot of firearms. They saw everything. To go to court would have taken a long time. So you could do exactly what you're saying, but take the guns first, go through due process second. So, not really demonstrating a whole lot of respect for the rule of law there.
No,
Seems to be a pattern.
nor the Constitution.
Or the Constitution, in this case, the Second Amendment. Also, of course, we're talking due process, right? So we're talking Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment. So keep that in mind. This was the Trump administration in 2017 banning bump stocks, and it was through a federal agency. Now, what is that agency? It's the one that has tobacco. So it's kind of funny that tobacco is included in this. You know what I'm talking
The
about.
ATF,
Say it again.
ATF, alcohol,
ATF?
tobacco, firearms.
Yes, exactly. What a combo, right?
Yeah, right.
So there's a federal law banning machine guns, right? The question is, do bump stocks and devices modified by these bump stocks qualify? And so instead of the law being changed, which would require an act of Congress, the federal government through the administrative, I mean, yeah, well, the executive branch
The
through
Trump administration.
Trump administration, through
Right.
its administrative authorities at the time, changed the interpretation of how the agency would read that law, right? Because previously bump stocks were not included in that. In other words, they weren't considered part of the definition of machine gun. Now
Right.
they would be. So they were reversing their policy and saying, now we're going to include bump stocks and how we interpret this federal law, right? And so it was challenged by the owner of a firearm store, I believe, and made its way to the Supreme Court. And by the way, I don't know if you would consider this irony or if he's actually right in this quote, right? The part of the quote where he says, if you go to court, it takes a long time. Well, yeah, so this policy was in 2017, and in 2024, the Supreme Court decides on it. So it just goes to show you how long things take to get through the court system. That's
Right.
true, right? So the Supreme Court said that, and again, this is a majority decision, so you did have your dissents, and you can look at this along partisan lines, right? Your liberal justices dissenting. I think Sotomayor wrote the dissent, where the majority is saying that if you want to ban bump stocks, you have to include that in the law. Congress has to write that into the law. You can't just change your interpretation of the law in response to a mass shooting. And Sotomayor in her dissent was saying, listen, basically, if it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? I'm considering this a machine gun because it turns a gun into a machine gun. And that's why I'm saying that it's proper to ban it, right? But nonetheless, the majority here is saying, listen, the executive branch exceeded its authority. Congress has to act on this. And so Chuck Schumer, I saw, was racing to introduce a bill to do it through Congress. Of course, you're going to run into that deadlock problem that you so often have in Congress, right?
Right.
Because clearly, if you worry about the Supreme Court acting too politically, well, Congress is all political. Right? It's a political
Right.
by definition, and so here we go, right? When you have one house controlled by one side, the other by the other, and even within parties, you can't come to a consensus often. So it's really hard to get anything through Congress, especially something as controversial and as polarized as this is likely to be. But nonetheless, that is where we stand, and I do think it is consistent largely with how this Supreme Court majority has interpreted the Constitution and statutes, right? They're very strict on, listen, you have to read the statute as it's written, and the executive branch can't really go in and change our understanding of how these things are to be read and applied. If you want to do that, you need a new law.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yes, well, we'll get your thoughts on a second. I just want to say in summation here, because people are always like, oh, so are you on their side? No, I believe that bump stocks should be banned. Let's be clear on that, right? But reading the decision and taking a look at this from a constitutional, from a legal perspective, I understand the reasoning as to why they came down the way they did, and I don't think it's necessarily because they're just so in love with guns, because we've seen this type of reasoning on other issues. We could be cynical and say, well, if it was something completely different, something that was, I don't know off the top of my head what it would be, but something that, let's say, conservatives hated but progressives loved, maybe then they would do some more dancing to rule the other way. It's plausible, right? It could happen, but from what I've seen, they have been pretty consistent when it comes to this type of case. And we also see that they'll even rule this way against the Trump administration. So they're doing it pretty indiscriminately.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be seen as a stall tactic to make sure that the bump stocks don't get banned. Um, how was the vote in the Supreme Court on this? Was it a
Six.
long? So it was a long ideological lines, basically.
Yes.
So
However, it isn't only, so we have to be a little more nuanced in how we look at this, because it isn't
sure.
only that, oh, well, those six are just some gun loving fools, right? I mean, those six tend to apply the law and the Constitution this way in all cases, right? They're more likely to say that the president's power is very limited and Congress has to make a law, right? They're very strict when it comes to that, right? They're the type to say, look, we have activist judges who are making laws, and the president trying to make law. You can't do that. Only the legislative branch can make law, right? So
Right.
while yes, it is the conservative majority, I read it more as conservative in terms of their interpretation of how the Constitution and the law works.
That's definitely, yeah. I mean, and I think, hmm, it's interesting that that type of change would come from the Trump administration,
Mm-hmm.
especially because the GOP, the conservative followers, the MAGA folks are very much pro-gun,
Right.
and making this sort of move would sound like something that Democrats or progressives would do. Um, so it's kind of surprising in that way.
Yeah, it is. And it's an interesting thought experiment. What if, at the time while he was president, he called upon Congress to pass that as a law? Right?
Right,
Would the Republicans in Congress have been able to go along with it because he was calling for it? Or would they have been afraid of pushback from the NRA and other types of groups, maybe even their voters who are so pro gun, where they wouldn't have been able to do it, right? I mean, would that be an
right,
instance of something where he's pushing for something that's, for lack of a better term, too liberal or too progressive for his own
right,
base and his own Congress people in his party?
right. Yeah. So that's interesting to me. Um,
Yeah, and the politics of that is very interesting. I just get a little frustrated, but I'm an attorney, so I guess that's par for the course. But you read these articles and they don't really go in on the legal analysis. They talk almost exclusively about the politics of it. And I think that feeds into the cynicism that we have, right? I think a lot of the cynicism is well founded and deserved. But
mhm.
I think
Sure.
when everything you see, I mean, this is a USA Today article, but every article you see, everything, on TV and all media focuses on the politics of it and doesn't really go in on the law.
Hmm.
I think it just leads to us losing faith in our institutions generally.
Sure. And that's an issue. Um, and that doesn't just apply in this situation.
Right.
That's just across the board. The people have lost faith in a lot of institutions. I mean, even in voting in general, like and it's really sad to hear, but I think it's well deserved that cynicism.
Right. The cynicism is well deserved, and we've given plenty of reasons on the show as to why
Yeah.
and how. But I still would like to see media do a better job at how they cover some of this stuff. And look, I get it. They're not writing for an audience of lawyers, and the writers aren't lawyers, but I don't know, maybe have more legal advisors on hand, someone who can look at that and be like, let's try to get the law right. At least don't mischaracterize the law. Don't make it
Hmm.
seem like everything the Supreme Court does by definition is political. I mean, that could be more of an editorial. Maybe you can say, yeah, they have too much political bend, but when covering it, at least present the reasoning and don't leave the reader the impression that they just did this because they love guns and not, say nothing more to it. Especially when
Right.
you're not writing what is purported to be an editorial, right? It's supposed to be just news articles. They should be a little bit more neutral in their coverage. And I think that they might be trying to be neutral, but they're not quite getting it when they leave you with the impression that the Supreme Court is a strictly political beast.
Right. We'll see how
At
that
least,
plays
at
out.
least give the full story and let the viewer, let the reader decide how to interpret it.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
All right. So the other case was the abortion pill case, and again, when looking at the coverage on this, people are focusing on the politics of it. Right. I've seen people on TV. Oh, isn't it interesting? They didn't strike down the abortion pill law, but they did strike down the gun law. What does that say? All right, why don't you start by actually looking at the decisions and why they're, at least why they say they're coming to these conclusions, right? Without making everything about, does this mean that the Supreme Court now loves abortion and hates guns, or I guess I don't, I don't know. Hates guns, loves guns. I guess they're saying that they love guns, but they also support abortion now because of these decisions. But no, on this one, it was decided on very technical grounds. And they said that the plaintiffs didn't have standing to bring the suit, which means that when you file a lawsuit as a plaintiff in a case, you have to show that you suffered harm by whatever law you're challenging, right? Whatever decision that you're challenging. So they said that this case was brought by doctors and anti-abortion activists, and they could not show that they suffered harm as a result of other people's rights being affected.
Mm.
So by giving the right to this abortion pill to women, that had nothing to do with these doctors and anti-abortion advocates, at least not in terms of them suffering an injury. They weren't injured
Right.
as a result of someone else being given rights. Now, I find
Right.
this interesting. I agree with that, but
What were they suing on the grounds of, though?
oh, at that I don't know. But they were saying that it might have been. I don't know. I actually don't know the legal argument that they presented here.
Oh,
Again,
okay.
when you read the coverage, they don't talk about that, right? They make it sound like this is all political stuff. So,
Right.
um, let's see. And I'm also frustrated with this because I try to find these decisions, and you click on these links. You know how when you read these articles, they'll underline like one phrase in the article, and you think, "Oh, is that what the decision is?" Sometimes it
Right.
is. Oftentimes, it just links you to a different article that they wrote, and then you're
Right.
playing the game where you're trying to find. And now my whole thing just crashed trying to click on these links. So I don't know the legal analysis that they use to challenge it. I'm just
Mm.
trying to think. Normally, when someone challenges an abortion drug or abortion, I mean, they probably say that it's murder. And sometimes they go really crazy that you're depriving due process of the fetus and all these different types of things. They may have said that the authority had gone too far, also, right?
Right. Okay.
So and to be fair, oftentimes it's let's throw all our possible legal arguments against the wall and see which ones stick. So before even getting to the merits of that, right, this case was thrown out by saying that these plaintiffs didn't suffer any injury. What I find interesting about this is, and I would love to be able to pull up this case. I'm sure I can find it eventually here. But who does suffer injury, right?
Hmm.
Who would have standing to sue? Are you saying that only the women who are able to take this abortion pill are able to sue? Possibly. That seems a little strange because you're almost saying that I'm suing because you're giving me too many rights,
How
right?
so?
Well, because remember, the standard here is in order to be able to bring suit, you have to show that you've been harmed by the law that you're challenging. And so
Right.
they would be bringing a suit saying, I'm challenging this law because it harms me. Well, how does it harm you? It expands my rights. You know what I mean? That seems kind of weird.
Uh, well, it seems like what happened was I guess the Supreme Court rejected the restriction. So
They
for
rejected the
now,
challenge based on lack of standing. So they
right. So
allowed right. So they allowed the abortion pill to stand, right, because they didn't have standing to challenge the law.
right. So for now, it's still available, still has access.
Correct. And again, this is not a substantive ruling. So people are looking at this like, oh, they came down on the side of the abortion pill. No, if a proper plaintiff, in their
Right.
eyes, brought the lawsuit, they would go through with the arguments and decide the case on the merits. They haven't done that. They just said that the
Right.
wrong person brought the lawsuit. But see, that kind of information I think is lost in a lot of this coverage.
Right. Right. Because
People
it,
are
it
talking about this.
right, it's a hot button topic, right? The whole abortion topic and anything related to it. And so I think the coverage is probably going to take that sort of view and instead of the more legal nuanced approach that or analysis approach that you're taking.
Sure. But here's the thing when people are left with the wrong impression, if they think that the
Absolutely.
court made a decision on this, what happens when someone else brings a lawsuit and challenges it, and the Supreme Court actually makes a decision on it? What if they overturn it? What if they take away this abortion pill? people are going to be like, I thought they already decided that. They already decided that months ago, years ago. What are you talking about? This was already decided. Wasn't this in the news? They already decided this because
Right.
coverage is not all of it, right? Some of it talks about the standing issue, but I think generally the way this is being presented is the Supreme Court made a decision on this issue, and they really haven't.
Right.
So
Is that how a lot of it's being covered so far that you've seen?
I am saying that, and especially the way people are talking about it, right? If you watch cable news or any political show on TV, they'll talk about, well, the Supreme Court overturned the Trump policy with guns and they upheld the abortion pill. And so does this mean that the Supreme Court is woke or that kind of thing? Or they'll say, oh, it's interesting how they're very pro-gun. They're so conservative on the gun issue, but on the abortion issue now, it seems like maybe they thought they went a little too far, and so they're feeling shame because they overturned Roe v. Wade, and so now they're doing this to try to throw a bone to the pro-abortion people, and they're trying to look at everything very politically and try to analyze what does this mean politically when I really don't think it's that deep politically. I think most of this is constitutionally decided. Yes, through
Mm.
their own political lens constitutionally, but again, no decision was actually reached here on the merits of the abortion pill. So
Right.
let's, keep perspective here and not call it something it isn't.
Right. And what that would indicate also is that it like you said, it leaves it open for challenges in the future,
Right.
if uh, potentially brought by who they deem is the right party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
So,
actually
and
finally pulled
interesting
up
that it was a unanimous
that was
uh,
unanimous. Yeah.
decision. That's quite interesting.
Yeah. I actually pulled up the case here finally. So I'm going to skim through this. We have a poll from last week, right? So
We do have a poll from last week.
do you want to go over that? And then in the meantime, let's see if I can speed read through this and try to gain more than the articles presented.
Sure, we can do that.
All right.
So, we did have a poll last week. We were talking about Governor Kathy Hochul and the congestion pricing program. She stepped in at the last minute and paused its implementation. So the question that we raised in the poll was, do you agree with Governor Hochul's decision to pause the implementation of congestion pricing? Now, congestion pricing was meant to uh, ease traffic and address some environmental concerns, pollution concerns, but by charging people a fee to come into Manhattan. So there have been pros and cons. There have been people opposing and supporting this program. And so the results of this poll is interesting.
Mm,
So 40% said yes, they agree. 60% said no, they don't agree with her decision to pause the implementation.
wow. I wonder if that has something to do with all of the political pressure that's been put on her. We talked about groups protesting in Albany and everything. So there's been a lot of hoopla about this, and some people are framing this as bad for New York.
It could be. So some of the comments, I mean, someone just wrote no, no, no like 8 times. Hochul is in serious error here, certainly in terms of New Yorkers' environmental health, probably for its economic well-being. Um, and it's been no slam dunk for her political standing, surprisingly. Um,
It
so,
depends on whom you're talking to, right? Because that decision was certainly applauded here in South Queens, in parts of Manhattan,
mhm,
not. But even in Manhattan, see, it depends on whom you're talking to, right? Because there are some, I don't want to name names here, but there are some people even in Manhattan who are saying, listen, this is going to turn our area into a park and ride. This is bad for us. So even
right,
areas where they don't necessarily drive a lot, they take their public transit. They don't want people driving in and parking in their areas because they want to avoid having to drive downtown, right?
Right. Yeah. Someone mentioned, I guess in opposition, said congestion fees are a huge burden in NYC. Um, Even the bridge fees, for example, for people who are not rich. So, and that's been talked about too. Like it could, overly burden people who are on the lower income tier because, that fee to someone who's making more may be a little insignificant, but it makes up a bigger portion for someone who doesn't have as much.
That is a great point because so much of this is framed, I think, as well. If you have the luxury of being able to drive, you're rich anyway, you're affluent, right? You're so much better than everyone who has to take the train. Is looked at through that lens, like it's a class
Right.
battle, right? You're on the train, that means you're poor. You're in the car, that means you're rich. And we know that that's
Right.
very reductive. That's not really how it works. We talk about neighborhoods in South Queens where you have to drive to get around. Is everyone in South Queens rich? Is everyone who takes the subway who lives in Manhattan poor? Certainly not, right?
Right. And
So,
someone brought that up.
yeah,
Yeah, someone brought that up in their response. They're saying uh for most of the not rich, they're already on the subway or bus. Um, but that doesn't mean that everybody that's on the subway or bus, one, are not rich, or that everyone that has a car is rich.
right,
Like,
right. I think people should have to experience life in other places, and that goes for us too. But so much of these conversations is just dictated by people speaking as if everyone lives life the way they do, and
right,
they're in their bubbles, right? Come spend time in South Queens. Go to Staten Island. Go to places that maybe you wouldn't normally go, and just see how people are living before
right,
commenting and acting like you know, and you can put everyone in these neat boxes.
right. Now someone brought up the point. They said they don't like it, but the feeling is that they need to get through the election first, then do the hard stuff. We need the House majority back. It means winning back seats in New York and revisit this after the election.
That's a little odd to say because we're talking about the governor of New York and the players in the state. He's making a federal argument. He's saying that everyone who is in the state government should pause the work of the state government to focus on winning federal elections.
It would seem, and it was supported. Someone else said, yes, many of the things there are a number of things Dems have done in the past 6 months that take ammo away from the GOP. Many of them suck, but we need to win back the House, hold the Senate, and reelect Biden. The wolves are at the gate.
See,
So,
it's wild to me because we always talk about how politics is local and that what happens in these local races really affects our everyday lives even more than what happens at the federal level. But because so much of the news coverage, I think, is about what happens federally, you'll get comments like this where people will say, who cares what happens locally? We just have to win federally. And it's like, well, hold up. This is something that really affects us directly. We're talking about whether we have to pay a toll or more tolls to drive or travel, right? What our commutes are
mm,
going to look like. That has a very direct impact on our lives. And that's very important, right? They're almost like, it seems like they're suggesting that that's secondary. That's something we shouldn't even be thinking about until we do what we got to do with the Congress. It just seems kind of backwards.
yeah. Um, yeah, there's a couple of people going back and forth on that, in regards to um, the election coming up and whatnot. Someone else had said that,
Don't forget, by the way, this is New York. So it's not like New York is in true danger of going red in the presidential election, if that's what they're thinking.
right. Someone said that this is cowardice, pure and simple on her part. It was a bad decision. She caved into big money folks when the policy could be enormously beneficial to New York City and the preservation of public transportation. Another one said that this was irresponsible idea to have waited so long to act against it. Now that NYC Transit is going to be short $1 billion in anticipated funding.
Well, here is where I'll give them some credit, right? I'll credit their argument a little bit because they're talking about also individual House districts, right? So forget
Mm.
the U.S. Senate, forget the presidential race. That's not really at play this November in New York, but it may come into effect if you're talking about an individual swing district for a congressional seat, and those
Right,
matter, right? So I'll give them that credit and say if that's your concern, that let's say congestion pricing went into effect and it just infuriated people in certain areas and it made them vote a certain way, maybe that could make a difference in very particular House elections, right? So
right.
I get that part of it, but still the overarching theme of let's stop the work of the state until after the federal elections. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, I mean,
Not saying
I
that.
can imagine that
By the
if
way, I
it's
agree. I agree with the decision to stop congestion pricing. So let's not misquote me on this, but I'm just saying generally speaking, right? The idea of let's stop doing everything because we're afraid of doing something controversial up until November, and that's going to tip the House elections a certain way. I mean, that's not really doing the work of the people if that's your approach.
yeah. So it's again, it seems split, and that's a lot of the coverage seem to be the same. Some people apparently people are for and against it. Someone said personally, congestion pricing may hurt me, but I think it needs to be done. Um, so yeah, I was a little surprised. I was expecting that it would be the opposite. Maybe, 60% saying yes, they support her decision and 40% saying no, they don't. But more people supported her decision to
See,
implementation.
it is interesting. It does depend on the demographics of who answered the poll. And
Sure.
it would be really interesting to see how people voted versus whether they drive or not.
That definitely true. So yeah, you don't know much about who all is voting in here.
Right. Right. And
So
it's funny how they give everything a name that makes it sound palatable, right? Congestion pricing. And they say this is going to reduce congestion. Of course, what else, right? In the name, congestion pricing.
right.
So they make it seem like you're bad for opposing something, right? And it's like, well, so are you saying that you're for congestion? Right?
Yeah. So, someone brought up that it seems like it's a dishonest, uh, and corrupt and incompetent to step in at the last minute to do this to kind of try to like either make it look like she's doing a heroic save or something like this, like to look seem disingenuous to this person here.
Why? Because she stopped it? What about it seemed disingenuous?
Um, he says, or she says, and they say they're leaning towards thinking it's a good idea and a good step for the policy. But
Mm-hmm.
they're saying what I'm clear on is that Hochul's heroic stepping in here at the last second, last effing second, with utterly idiotic, nonsensical, made up logic to back it. Um, it looks incredibly dishonest, corrupt, and incompetent. It's a real embarrassment that stinks of the criminal legacy of her patron, Andy Cuomo. Doesn't really say why he feels this way.
Right.
Um, and then he calls out, apparently she's considering banning masks on the subway.
Yes, that's going to be a topic probably for another week. That
Yeah, we should talk about that. That's crazy.
Yeah,
But
but I think that's
so
tied to crime, right? Concern about crime.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, so interesting. Not I was definitely expecting it to go the other way, because I just see it as a huge financial burden. I understand what the point of it is, and it's probably necessary. It's to somehow alleviate the congestion that's happening in Manhattan. But that burden on people, and we've quoted it often. We looked at that recent study that showed that over 50% of people in New York City can't afford their basic expenses.
Right.
And to add yet another expense would seem very difficult. I would want to look at other options to reduce the the traffic.
Sure. Now, the counter argument to that, because I've heard this made, is that it's really not an excuse to say you have to drive. And they'll say, listen,
Right. Sure.
right, you're driving into the city. It's a luxurious thing to do, according to them. But if you can't afford to pay it, you don't want to pay it, then take mass transit. That's what they're going to tell you.
Right. Yeah.
Now,
So,
I think that's a little bit insensitive to say. I don't think that that's really realistic. It sounds nice, right? But I think it's a little idealistic. Again, come live like people are living in South Queens or Staten Island or parts of Brooklyn or many parts of the city, and not just the city, but the suburbs, the surrounding areas for that matter, right?
and the
Sounds
workers, like
great to say,
people.
just take a bus, you asshole, right? But really,
Right.
I mean, it's not always feasible for people who have to commute. In the Rockaways, they have the longest commutes in the whole country. So
Right.
what are you telling people? And by the way, many of them do take the ferry and do take the A train, do take mass
Right.
transit. But for many people, that's not always an option, and you have to be sensitive to everyone's situation.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I do understand. I totally get the other side that's saying that, even, you can't always be uh that sensitive for everything if something needs to get done. If this is a something that does need to happen, sometimes people will have to make adjustments. I get that as well. But
Right,
maybe there should also be just some options on the table to go about it.
right. And I do agree with the governor's characterization that it's unimaginative to presume that that's the only way to do this.
Right,
And the MTA is not going to be able to make up its money because that's what it came down to again, right? The
right,
MTA
right,
bottom line. It was a big freak out about, well, how are they going to get money now? Well,
right.
there are other ways to do it. We talked about looking into enforcing fare evasion a little bit more as one.
Yeah, streamline your business. What are you doing that's blowing through money so badly? And you haven't made any upgrades. Like, what do
Right.
you do?
Make better investments in the infrastructure. How about that? Right. How about
Yeah,
upgrading the public transit system? Make it more appealing to take the day.
yeah. When was the last time the MTA had an audit? That's what I think they need.
So I'm on page 22, as we've been speaking
All
about.
right.
I'm on page 22 of 38 of this decision. So far, all 22 pages have been devoted to the standing issue. I did get a little bit more insight as to what the doctors here were arguing, at least in terms of standing. They were saying that they were injured by this FDA policy. It's an FDA policy to allow this drug on the market or what have you. They're saying that they're being injured because, number one, it hurts their conscience. These are anti-abortion doctors, so they're saying that to have to be involved in this market where this drug is available, it hurts them consciously, I guess, emotionally or whatever. And they're
Mm,
saying also that it's going to affect their bottom line somehow by this drug being out there. But the court is saying that's all too speculative and not concrete enough to constitute an actual injury such that standing is there. So what they're saying is that, hey, listen, we understand your feelings might be hurt, basically, and you think that this may in some way affect your bottom line, but there's no direct causation between what the FDA did and your alleged injury, and so you're not the right
right,
person to bring this case. And
right, right.
again, I don't think this says that. Again, it was said 9-0 decision. I don't think it says that any of these justices suddenly change their view on abortion or anything like that. I think that they're applying the law very strictly here.
Mhm. So,
So I'm going to keep skimming this. I want to see if there's anything interesting beyond that. Let's see. I mean, they go in, they talk about how Justice Scalia defined standing and the whole history of standing. And, I guess it's interesting from that perspective if you want to know how the Supreme Court looks at the issue of standing. I'm
right,
still not seeing, by the way, any substantive argument that these doctors are making against the FDA policy. I'm not sure if that's even reached in this. It might not be mentioned at all because if they don't have standing, there's nothing else to the case. It just gets dropped right there, right? So then you have to look at the
right.
argument on the substance.
So, well, I guess we'll see how how it plays out the next time around.
FDA says, according to the medical associations here, FDA has impaired their ability to provide services and achieve their organizational missions. That argument does not work to demonstrate standing. So they're basically saying, nice try, but you guys aren't the ones who are really harmed by this because you
Right,
like that the FDA is giving other people rights who aren't you.
right. But
Now,
we did
again, I
have
just wonder if there's any kind of clue reading this as to who would have standing. Would it be the women who you're giving the rights to?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's probably just they just don't like the policy and they want to derail it somehow.
Sure, but who would be able to bring this lawsuit?
Mm, got me. Um, the only, like I said, I mentioned in pregame, the only one I could see that might have some kind of say would be the father if they opposed the abortion.
Oh, that you can say their father, like, oh wow, they can credit to your
No,
dad.
no, 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 no. The father of the pregnancy. You could say there might be an argument there. Um,
That, but see, to me, that seems, I get what you're saying, but that seems like it would fall in that same category as the doctors who are saying we're affected by this. I think they would say that that's too speculative and not causal, not enough causation.
well,
Although,
no, I think it's they have way better standing than doctors do because the doctors are a third party. They have no interest. I mean, your business,
sure,
how
well,
your business is affected has no
right.
bearing on their personal decisions, but the father could be missing out on fatherhood, their child being born, or that type of thing. So I think they have a better standing than
I just
doctors
don't
or
know
third
if
parties.
I don't think the law currently recognizes that as a cognizant.
Probably not.
And so I don't think there would be any injury here, the same way they say there's no injury because these
Right.
doctors are saying their feelings are hurt, it's against their conscience and it could affect their
Right.
lives and their organizational missions and so forth. So this is an interesting paragraph from the decision that comes on page 28, where the Supreme Court, again, unanimous decision, they say the plaintiffs have sincere legal, moral, ideological, and policy objections to elective abortion and to FDA's relaxed regulation of this drug.
Mm,
But under Article 3 of the Constitution, those kinds of objections alone do not establish a justiciable case or controversy in federal court. Here, the plaintiffs have failed to demonstrate that FDA's relaxed regulatory requirements likely would cause them to suffer an injury in fact. For that reason, the federal courts are the wrong forum for addressing the plaintiffs' concerns about FDA's actions. The plaintiffs may present their concerns and objections to the president and FDA in the regulatory process, or to Congress and the president in the legislative process. And they may
right.
express their views about abortion and this drug to fellow citizens, including the political and electoral processes. So basically, they're saying what you said: go cry to your father.
Well, I'm sure someone's going to bring it up. It's not gonna be the last time that someone tries to do that. I mean, we've
Right.
seen that um, movement is dead set on eliminating abortion, access to abortion in any and all forms, and even going so far as some talking about contraception. Um,
Sure. Justice Thomas,
so
even in the
yeah,
concurring opinion. So,
so
yeah,
this won't be the last time, I'm sure.
again, I just wonder who is going to have standing according to the court. Because in theory, someone would have to be able to challenge it, right? They can't be like,
Right.
oh, no one can possibly be harmed by this. Although it does kind of seem that way in a sense, because again, logically, I think we're left to think, all right, maybe the women who are affected by this drug's availability would have standing. But if someone wants to sue to say that
Right.
I'm harmed because this drug is available, well, no one's forcing you to take the drug. So how are you
Right.
harmed simply by virtue of the drug being available, a bit by that being a choice that you have, right?
Right. So, well, we did have one more topic before we wrapped up here.
Okay.
And this was another, this was a bill, not a court case, but this was a bill. The House had passed the annual National Defense Authorization Act, and there was here we go. there was a bill that automatically registered men from 18 to 26 for selective service. So currently, selective service is mandatory for male U.S. citizens 18 to 24. As soon as you turn 18, all men are supposed to register for selective service, which is still technically a draft, but they make it mandatory for you to sign for it. And if not, there are some penalties, potential consequences
Let me ask
for it.
you this: 18 to 24, but you have to sign up when you turn 18, right?
Yes.
So what happens when you turn 24? Are you taken out of the database?
Yeah, you're not in the selective service registry anymore.
You're not in it.
This bill expands it to 18 to 26,
Mhm.
and they would automatically register you for the selective service. So,
18 to 26, but it has some interesting strings attached to it that we found, right?
well, it is. Where was it here? I did look at the bill here. It's not just, and you would assume, as far as I know, currently selective service is male citizens, like I just mentioned. However, it also says uh, every male citizen in the United States and every other male person residing in the United States between the ages of 18 and 26 will automatically be registered under this act. But this does not apply to aliens lawfully admitted to the United States as a non-immigrant.
As a non-immigrant. So that's the important word there, non-immigrant. So people
Right.
admitted to the U.S. as immigrants would qualify.
Right. And so it would seem that people like, overseas students or people in the country, uh, foreign residents or foreign citizens working in the country don't fall under this. But I think that probably attempts to obligate undocumented folks for
Right.
being a part of selective service.
Because they would be males residing in the country.
And they would not admit it as immigrants.
Well, no, this only carves out people admitted as non-immigrants. So they weren't admitted as non-immigrants. They weren't admitted at all, but they were not admitted as non-immigrants, so that wouldn't even apply to them.
But they were residing in the country.
Right.
And
That's what I'm saying.
right.
That
They weren't
applies to
law, but
every male.
it says that it does not apply to people that were lawfully admitted. They're
As
not lawfully.
non-immigrants. Doesn't even matter if it's lawfully or non-lawfully. That carve out only applies to non-immigrants, right?
Right.
It only applies to people admitted as non-immigrants. So if that doesn't apply to you, if you were not admitted as a non-immigrant, but you're
Right.
here, you're residing in the country, you
Right.
would be registered for this, meaning even undocumented immigrants, right? People who are permanent residents, everyone
Right.
just here. If you're right, as long as you weren't admitted as a non-immigrant, so I guess that would be what, like someone coming into work, maybe like you said, an exchange student, something like
Exchange students, that type
that.
of thing.
People on vacation.
Yeah, right. Imagine that. You can you come to the United States for like a week on vacation and something breaks out and they're like, "Oh yeah, we're pulling you up."
Right, right. So they
Um,
would be, but everyone
right,
who's here on a permanent basis who was not admitted as a non-immigrant
right,
would be registered. And
right.
so, is this an effort to try to create a database of undocumented immigrants?
That I don't know. Um, but there are regulations to it, and this is the first one in here says a person subject to registration under this section um, may be required to provide the director information including date of birth, social security account number, phone number, and email address.
Mm-mm-mm.
Um, so, and it does not, at least I'm not seeing here, does not include women, which is another thing that's selective service. If you're a woman, age 18, you do not have to register, although there have been some attempts in the past to get women included because they do already serve in the military as well, but none of them has passed or made it into law.
Right.
So, so
So
this,
here's my question: is there anything about the mechanism of how this would actually work? Because they're saying on the one hand that they're going to automatically register you, but
right,
on the other hand, they're saying you may have to provide information about your bank accounts and your social security and whatever else. So how are they automatically registering you if they don't have that information? So are they going to be basically sending you a form and saying you're registered, but yes, you have to give us? I mean, are you registered if they don't have any of your information?
Well, I think, if they've got a record of you somewhere, I mean, tax record or school record or social security record, something like that, they won't have your phone number or any of that stuff, but they can go ahead and enroll you into the system.
They can enroll you, but it's also saying that you may have to provide this other info. So
Right.
in theory, what there would be an entry in the database with you in it, but lacking all that info until you provide it. I mean, so then they'll put you in the database, but then try
It
to chase
doesn't
down
say
that other info.
how. Yeah, it doesn't say how. It just says that yeah, regulations under this section may require
May
uh
require.
yeah, it doesn't say how that would be done, but yeah.
And so, are you able to pull up the sponsor's memo to this to see why they're saying they need this? Because this passed the House, didn't
This
pass the
passed the
Senate.
House,
So
yes.
let's not jump ahead of ourselves, right? This isn't a law. It's only passed the House.
Right.
Got to pass the Senate, and in all likelihood, will not pass the Senate. But is there any justification for why this was introduced in the first place?
Well, I haven't found why. I do know that the military has been suffering a lack in signups because we have an all voluntary military. So, it, we rely on people voluntarily signing up, and there's those recruitment numbers have been down and seem to keep going down. So this could be a way to make sure there's a healthy stock, but I'm not seeing specifically where, because this is
Yeah.
also part of a larger bill.
Okay. And this would also only really apply, at least as it relates to the military, if the draft were to be reinstated at some point, right?
If the selective service is yeah, if they choose to utilize the selective service to bring people up, yeah. So, which I've always found really, really crazy. Because of course, it was very controversial during the Vietnam War when the government drafted people into the military to go fight in that war. And then, of course, that was a controversial decision. And then they created this selective service, but they made it mandatory that you sign up for it. They're like, no, we don't have a draft, but it is mandatory that you sign up to say that you will go. It's like,
Mm,
it's the same thing. If you're making it mandatory, it's the same thing.
right.
So,
So
yeah.
yeah,
So,
it's interesting to me why they would be pushing for this now. What is the real motive behind this?
yeah, it doesn't have, because this is just a section in a much larger bill. It
Mm,
doesn't have any specifics that I'm seeing. But like I said, I know recruitment has been down and they've been struggling trying to get people recruited. So that could be one of the things that they're trying to address. Who knows?
okay, but so what does that mean though? So they have a database of everyone. Now what? They're going to recruit from that database? I mean, they will still have to bring back the draft, which is a whole nother.
Well, if they need to well, it's not really needing to bring back the draft. Once you're signed into the selective service, you're basically already agreeing to go if called.
If drafted though.
But yeah, but it's yeah, but you're saying you're going to do it. So they can just
Everyone has already been, even before this, been required.
right.
Maybe not the immigrants, right? The non-citizen immigrants, but my understanding is we were all required to sign up. This would just make it automatic, but
Yeah.
you still had to, by law, right, sign up for the selective service. It didn't mean that you were going to be drafted into war. We didn't have the draft.
Right. But if there's a national emergency, this
It could happen,
yeah, it could happen.
but that's what I'm saying. That would be another step that would have to be taken. It's not like this is automatically going to put more people in the military.
No, no. What would happen is if a national emergency came up and they needed it, they needed more bodies, they would just, you know, contact you and say, "Hey, you got to show up."
Right.
So,
That would be a policy that would need to be instituted by the government,
what do you mean?
meaning the draft in some form would have to be reinstated for that to be a reality.
I don't think so, because that's what this is. Like you're saying, I will go if called,
But if
and you're
called, okay,
agreeing
but
to
that
it.
called part has to be put into action.
Well, once there's a national emergency, that would have to be stated first. This is a national emergency,
Yeah,
and
you
then
would
then
still
they can
need the
just call you. You don't
policy.
have to go through any other process, as far as I know. You just
Well, I think
because you're already down.
you would still need the policy of we're going to start pulling people out of the selective service. It doesn't just happen automatically. Who declares it to be a national emergency such that you just start pulling from this pool?
That I think that's what would have to be declared first. And then once that's there, it opens up this book to be used if you want to use it.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. There still needs to be another step that you have to
The
get
de
to.
Yeah, the declaration of a national emergency, right?
Right.
And I don't know who does that. Maybe the
Not any,
president.
by the way, not any national emergency, one that we're going to require pulling people from this book, essentially drafting them into the military.
As far as I know, it just says what I read with the Selective Service. It just says in case a national emergency requires rapid expansion of the armed forces. That doesn't
Okay.
state
Requires
what
rapid
they're
expansion
used
of the armed forces.
for.
It's not
I'm
any
sorry?
national, requires rapid expansion of the armed forces. Like COVID was a national emergency. People weren't being drafted into the military because of it.
They weren't being, but at least what it says here,
Yeah,
it would sound like they could have if they needed troops to handle whatever that was.
but they would still need to enact that as a policy. They would have to get together and say, this is an emergency such that we need to start doing this again. And that would be very controversial, I'm sure.
I'm sure it would be. I still don't understand how this is even um, allowed to stand without controversy.
Yeah. And again, I really
Because it
don't
is
see
essentially
what,
still a draft, but you're
yeah,
required to sign up for it.
right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, see, and when I was young, we were always taught that it's basically moot. We have the selective service, you have to sign up for it, but there is no draft, and so it's meaningless. It's just something that's on the books now. And yeah, in theory, it could be brought back at some point, but we don't have it now. And so don't worry about it. You know what I mean? We'll have to do it, not be happy about it, but it doesn't mean that you're being called to war by doing it.
Yeah, it's very weird, and I'm not sure what it is. I'm looking at the Selective Service site right now, the government official one, and it just says it doesn't specify, and I'm sure there's probably some document somewhere that does. It just says um, that Selective Service collects the names and addresses of men 18 to 25 to use in case a national emergency requires rapid expansion. It is a civic and legal responsibility, but it doesn't specify what those things are. And then it goes down at the bottom. It says, um, registering for Selective Service does not mean you're volunteering to join the military. No one's been drafted since 1973. No one can be ordered for induction by Selective Service unless ordered by Congress and the president.
Right.
So Congress and the president would have to say, so see, to me, that's still it's kind of double speak. It doesn't mean you're volunteering to join the military.
No,
You
it is
can't be
right.
drafted, but no one can be ordered unless the Congress and the president says
Unless they
so.
bring back the draft, right? That's what I'm saying. So it's like
But still,
we're not doing it now, but we have
right.
this list in case at some point we decide that we're going to do it again. We need to have a list to be able to pull from, right?
That's what yeah. It's still like to me it's kind of weird to me.
Yeah, I think everyone feels a little weird about having to sign up for it, given that we're told there's no draft. Like, well, so if there's no draft and we
What am
don't
I
have
signing up
to,
for?
right?
Yeah.
Why do we have to sign up for anything?
And why is it mandatory? Why is
Right.
it a legal responsibility?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I mean, I think
That
so
is the reason, right? Just in case it's an in case thing, in case they bring it back. Let's say we're being invaded suddenly and they need to do a draft. They don't want to, but let's say they figure that they need to because they need to again rapidly expand the military. All right, well, where are they getting those names from? They have to have a database somewhere.
well they already know they can get it. It's just
They don't know. You think
it's
that
kind of
again,
crazy.
there is no they in this context. You think that they know. There's
They
really no
know.
list. There's no list
They
unless
know.
one is created. I mean, I've been in government. I see this. You think, oh yeah, there's a list of everyone who's been born here, and the DMV can pull up who's a citizen and who's not. There's really not. It's a lot of this done on the honor system. Do you pinky swear that you're who you say you are? So
So it's a very interesting a little bit
it
I don't
would
know.
make what would make more sense would be if, God forbid, they ever did reinstate the draft, then they required everyone who's 18 to 24 to raise their hands.
Yeah. And it's a pretty severe penalties. Like some of the minor ones is you may not be able to get federal student loans and federal jobs and this type of thing. But also there's the potential that there's a felony that's punishable with a fine of up to $250,000 and 5 years in prison.
Right.
So it's pretty significant if you don't sign up.
All right. So the poll of the week, do we want to make it about the Selective Service generally or about this particular bill?
I think yeah, it should maybe about should it be automatic or yeah, should this be an automatic thing?
That's a good question because then people who are even against having it at all will say no. And I'm sure that they'll comment and they'll say why they shouldn't have it at all or where they stand on it.
Right.
So I would imagine most people would say it shouldn't be automatic, but we'll see where people
But
come.
then on the flip side, it's like if you have to sign up anyway,
Right.
then being automatic just lessens the process and the paperwork. Like you
Well,
just
by that
automatically get involved.
token, should people automatically be registered to vote when they turn 18?
Yeah, right. That's another type of thing. So,
So, all right. Well, let's see what the people say on this. The poll question of the week is: do you think that males in the United States should be automatically enrolled in a selective service upon turning 18?
all right. Let's see what people have to say about that. Could have
Yeah.
also do one another time. Should women have to get in? That's a
Mm.
big, big question that I don't hear a lot of feminists chomping at the bit to be included in selective service.
I don't know if
Like,
anyone, it does seem antiquated. I'll be honest, it always has seemed antiquated, right? It seems like a remnant of Vietnam. And it's like, well, we don't do this anymore, but this is a just in case. But again,
yeah,
if they were to do it, I mean, what good is having a list from all these years, all these generations prior? You're going to have, you've been making a database now for decades. These people ain't 18 to 24 anymore. And so it seems like a whole lot of paperwork for what? Why
well,
not
I'm
just
sure.
start thinking about it if you're going to actually do a draft?
Well, I'm sure they can filter the list by people who are between
All
18
right.
and
What I'm
24.
saying
They
is there
don't have.
really a compelling reason to keep a list for all these years just in case, knowing that that's a small window, that 18 to 24, that's 6 years. And so
Yeah.
constantly people who are signing up for this are aging out of it. And you still haven't
Yeah.
done a draft in all these years. You haven't called upon it, right? In all these years. And so why can't they start building a list of who's 18 at the time they do it? Is that too late to do it? I mean, why can't it be we're going to, again, hopefully this never happens, but if it did, the draft goes into effect. Now everyone who's 18 must come forward and register. Is that can be, maybe that's considered too cumbersome at that point? They want to have the list to pull from because it would be an emergency situation and they don't want to have time creating new lists from scratch at that time. I mean,
It would probably
that
take
would
more
probably be
time.
the logistics of it, but it also seems pretty wasteful to have people signing up for all these years knowing that nothing's ever going to happen with it.
Well, they don't
And you have
know.
the issues of invasion of privacy and your information being out there and that kind of stuff for something that's just in case, which we haven't
They
done.
don't know that it's not going to be used. Who knows? It could turn up tomorrow. Something could
Well,
happen. Like, hey,
in theory, we can be invaded
we
by aliens.
hope it's not used.
Right, right. Well, but also we've had war, right? What about
Right.
Afghanistan, Iraq, and all these wars that we've had since, we
Yeah.
haven't used it. So,
Yeah.
no, are
So
we collecting too much information on people? Are we burdening them by too much? Are we being wasteful by? Is this just another example of government being too big or government overreaching? You know what I mean? By keeping these
yeah.
lists, databases, and these requirements, these regulations. You said possible felonies for something that isn't really in use.
Right.
So,
All I know is I think about the Eminem line where he says they're gonna take I'm what he said, I'm
yeah,
28, they're gonna take you before they take me.
yeah, something baked beans.
Yeah, yeah, like yeah, I'm past that age. I'm not going. So
So
um so yeah, something another
you're past that age, but you still have to register for Selective Service, and your name and information is probably still on a database somewhere.
probably.
Unless, like we said, when you turn 24, it automatically gets expunged. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how they operate that.
Yeah. So,
So
all right. We shall see what the people think.
yes.
Do we have a bottom
And
line?
yeah, I was gonna ask you, do you have a bottom line? I think I did the bottom line last week.
I gave the bottom line last week, didn't I?
I think I gave the bottom line last week.
Hmm. What about the whole speech about putting the bar too high? Was that 2 weeks ago?
Yes, I think so.
Having the bar be actually no, not too high. It wasn't high enough. We wanted to raise the bar.
Something like that.
Yeah, yeah. So what is the bottom line this week? I don't know. We talked about a few different things. We talked about the Supreme Court. We talked about congestion pricing. Talked about the selective service. Is there a tie in here?
Um, all had to do with some sort of politics. Um,
Yeah, I mean,
looking into, I guess, I mean, it's the general would be the nuance of it all,
right,
right? Of
right.
understanding, before understanding what the specifics or the details might be and the periphery before
Yes,
making your snap judgment
right.
or,
Yeah, you put the words in my
opposition
mouth.
or promotion.
Exactly. I was just thinking about that, right? Because we're so quick to put political labels on everything and look at
Right,
everything through a political lens. And we saw that with the Supreme Court cases. Oh, does this mean that they're conservative now, or they're even more conservative than Trump now, or does this mean that
right.
they're liberal now because of the abortion thing and they're overturning Trump? And everyone wants to put a political spin on it and not look at the actual case. And we saw something similar with the congestion pricing, right? It's like, oh, well, if you are a driver, we think that that means that you're wealthy. And if you take the public transit system, we think that means that you're struggling and poor. And we know that that's not necessarily the case either. And so before we put labels on everything and then come to a conclusion based on the way we think the label tells us we should actually look at the issue for what it is and at least try to understand the nuances of it before coming to a conclusion, because that's, I think, the way to get a more reasoned analysis.
There it is, and that's the bottom line. Scala coming in with the alley-oop
Tag team.
tag team. It's a yeah, so I think it was a good one, very good one right there. And they can find us on YouTube at Nuance Show and everywhere podcasts are available. Get involved, join the conversation.
Sounds good. As always, we got work to do. We'll catch you next time.